When we talk about learning a language, most people instantly think about textbooks, grammar drills, and vocabulary lists. While those tools have their place, there's something magical about learning through a story. A story doesn't just throw words at you. It invites you into a world. It pulls you in with characters you care about, moments you can feel, and events that make you want to know what happens next. This emotional connection is powerful because it makes your brain engage in a way that memorizing rules never can. You're not just studying, you're living the language. When you listen to or read a story in English, you're not simply being exposed to new words, you're meeting them in their natural home. Words are surrounded by other words that give them meaning, rhythm, and life. This is how native speakers learn from the very beginning. They don't memorize past tense verbs from a chart. They hear them in conversations, in bedtime stories, in real life. By absorbing English through a narrative, you give yourself that same immersive advantage. The context makes the meaning stick, and the emotions make it unforgettable. Think about the difference between reading the definition of a word like hesitate and hearing it in a sentence. She stood at the doorway, her hand frozen on the handle as if she might step forward or might run away. In that moment, you don't just know the word, you feel it. You understand the uncertainty, the pause, the quiet decision making. The story paints the picture and your brain naturally remembers it. That's what engaging storytelling does. It makes language come alive. And here's the beauty of it. It doesn't feel like studying. You don't sit there thinking, now I will learn 10 new words. Instead, you find yourself curious. You wonder what's going to happen next. You lean in. You keep listening or turning the page because you're invested. And while your attention is on the unfolding events, your brain is quietly working in the background, grasping sentence structures, noticing patterns, and learning pronunciation. It's like learning by accident, except it's the most natural way to learn. Stories also give you variety in language. In a single chapter, you might hear casual conversation, descriptive narration, and moments of reflection. This range exposes you to different registers of English, how people speak informally, how events are described in detail, and how thoughts are expressed with subtlety. All of this diversity strengthens your comprehension and prepares you to use English in many real-life situations. The emotional side of stories can't be ignored either. When you connect to the characters or the events, you're not just practicing English. You're experiencing empathy, suspense, joy, or sadness in another language. That emotional involvement locks the learning into your memory far more deeply than dry repetition ever could. You remember how a scene made you feel, and along with that feeling, you remember the words that carried it. And let's not forget that stories give you a safe environment to explore language without fear of mistakes. You can follow along, replay a sentence, pause to think, or repeat a phrase out loud. This flexibility allows you to absorb English at your own pace, without the pressure of real-time conversation. But because the story is moving forward, you're still challenged to keep up, which keeps your learning active and dynamic. The more you listen to stories in English, the more your ear begins to tune itself to the sounds and rhythms of the language. You start to recognize familiar expressions, anticipate how sentences might end, and even guess the meaning of unfamiliar words just from the surrounding context. This skill, called inference, is a mark of true language mastery, and stories are one of the best ways to develop it. Over time, you'll notice that your vocabulary isn't just bigger, it's richer. You won't only know individual words, you'll know how they fit together, how they change depending on the situation, and how they carry subtle shades of meaning. This depth of understanding is what separates someone who knows English from someone who can truly communicate with confidence and precision. So when I say unlocking language skills through engaging storytelling, I mean giving yourself a key that opens many doors at once. The door to understanding, the door to speaking naturally, the door to thinking in English without translating in your head. It's an approach that blends learning with enjoyment, so that every minute spent listening or reading feels less like a lesson and more like an adventure. And once you discover how powerful that combination is, you'll never look at language learning the same way again. One of the most exciting parts of learning English is realizing that your vocabulary can grow without feeling like you're forcing it. You don't have to sit with a dictionary and memorize endless lists of words. Instead, you can let them come to you naturally, just like they would in real life. When you learn new words in the middle of a meaningful situation, whether in a conversation, a scene from a story, or a moment you can picture clearly, those words stick. They stop being abstract and start becoming part of your thinking. You're not learning them for the sake of learning. You're learning them because you need them in that moment, and that makes all the difference. Think about the way children pick up language. They don't study lists of kitchen vocabulary before they can talk about dinner. They hear someone say, "Pass me the spoon," and they connect the sound of the word to the object in front of them. That's natural learning. Words are tied to actions, feelings, and things you can see or touch. The same happens when you, as a learner, encounter words in real-life contexts. If a story describes someone walking through a busy market, you hear the names of fruits, the sounds of bargaining, and phrases that people use to buy and sell. Without even trying, your mind begins to collect these words and file them in the right place, ready for you to use later. When vocabulary is learned this way, it doesn't just sit in your memory, it becomes accessible. You remember not only the word itself, but also how it sounds, how it's used, and the emotion behind it. This is far more powerful than simply reading a definition. A dictionary might tell you that gloomy means dark and sad. But when you hear it in a sentence like, "The sky was gloomy," as if it had been crying all night, you don't just know the meaning. You can see it, feel it, and even imagine the kind of day that word belongs to. Real, life contexts also help you understand which words are actually useful. English is full of words you might never need in a real conversation, and focusing on those can slow you down. But when you pick up vocabulary through a story, a dialogue, or an experience, you're naturally learning the words that people actually use in daily life. This makes your speech sound more natural and makes your understanding sharper in real interactions. Another advantage is that you learn how words connect to each other. You don't just learn market on its own. You learn go to the market, buy vegetables at the market, crowded market, and open-air market. These connections make it easier for you to form sentences naturally without pausing to translate in your head. In a real-life context, these word partnerships, what linguists call collocations, become second nature because you've heard them as complete ideas rather than as separate pieces. And then there's the rhythm and tone of language. Words don't exist in isolation. They carry a certain energy depending on how they're said. When you hear someone use a new word in a real conversation or in a scene, you absorb that natural rhythm without even realizing it. You start to pick up on the way certain words are emphasized, the way they rise or fall in tone, and the way they blend with the words around them. This is what makes your English sound authentic rather than robotic. The process also builds confidence. You might start small. Maybe you recognize a single new word in a story, but soon you're spotting patterns. You notice that certain words often appear together. You find yourself using them in your own sentences, first hesitantly, then more fluently. And because you learned them in a natural setting, they don't feel forced. They feel like they belong to you now. The more you place yourself in situations where English words come with clear meaning, whether through listening to stories, watching a scene, or joining conversations, the more your vocabulary grows in a way that's both effective and enjoyable. It's not about pressure or speed. It's about making every new word a part of your lived experience in the language. In the end, building vocabulary naturally and real. Life contexts turns English learning into something far more human. It transforms it from a chore into a journey, one where every new word feels like a friend you've met along the way, someone you didn't have to search for because they found you exactly when you needed them. When you're learning a language, one of the biggest challenges is understanding what people are saying in real time. It's one thing to read words on a page where you can go back and check them, and another thing entirely to follow a conversation, a news clip, or a story as it's being spoken. This is where graded audio becomes such a powerful tool. It gives you a bridge between slow, simple language and the natural speed and complexity of everyday English. Instead of throwing you straight into the deep end, graded audio meets you where you are and gradually takes you further, step by step. Listening comprehension is not just about hearing words. It's about making sense of them quickly enough to keep up with the speaker. That takes practice, and the best practice is when you can understand enough to follow along, but still have to stretch a little to keep pace. Graded audio is designed exactly for that. It uses vocabulary and grammar at your level, but it doesn't simplify so much that you stop learning. The sentences are clear, the pronunciation is careful, and there's just enough challenge to make your brain work without feeling overwhelmed. One of the most useful aspects of graded audio is that it gives you time to connect sound with meaning. If you only read, you might know a word visually, but not recognize it when you hear it. In real conversations, that's a problem, because speech is fast and words often blend together. But when you listen to audio that's been created for learners, you hear each word in context at a speed you can manage. This gives your brain the chance to link the spoken form of the word to its meaning and to store it in your memory in a way that will be easy to retrieve later. It also helps you notice the music of English, the way the voice rises and falls, the way certain words are stressed, and the rhythm that carries the meaning forward. You start to realize that meaning doesn't come only from the words themselves, but from the way they're delivered. For example, the same sentence can sound friendly, urgent, or sarcastic depending on the tone. By listening carefully to graded audio, you can focus on these subtleties without the pressure of missing too much of the content. Another advantage is that graded audio often comes with the option to read along with a transcript. This is incredibly helpful for training your listening. You can first listen without reading to test your comprehension, then follow along with the text to catch any words or phrases you missed. Finally, you can listen again without the text, noticing how much more you understand now that you've connected the sounds and the spelling. This cycle, listen, read, listen again, is one of the fastest ways to strengthen your listening skills. Repetition plays a big role as well. In real life, you can't always ask someone to repeat themselves 5 times. But with audio, you can replay a sentence or a section until your ear becomes familiar with it. Each repetition sharpens your ability to pick out words more quickly, and over time, you start to rely less on translation in your head and more on direct understanding. You stop thinking, "What does this mean?" and start thinking, "I get it," almost instantly. The more you work with graded audio, the more your brain adjusts to processing English at a faster pace. This prepares you for the leap into authentic materials like podcasts, interviews, and movies, where people speak quickly, use slang, and don't slow down for learners. Because you've trained with graded content, you're not starting from zero. You've built a strong foundation of recognition, speed, and confidence. Most importantly, graded audio turns listening from something stressful into something enjoyable. Instead of feeling lost, you find yourself following along, understanding most of what you hear, and catching new words in context. This sense of progress is motivating. You begin to look forward to listening practice because it feels like a skill you're actively mastering rather than a test you're constantly failing. With consistent practice, your ears stop straining to catch every word, and you start hearing English the way native speakers do, as a flow of meaning, not just a chain of individual sounds. And when that happens, you realize that you're no longer just learning English. You're living it. One of the most effective ways to sound natural in English is to train your pronunciation by listening to and following narrated speech. When you hear a skilled narrator speak, you're not just getting the meaning of the words. You're receiving a full model of how English is supposed to sound. The rhythm, the melody, the stress on certain syllables, and even the pauses are all part of what makes speech clear and expressive. By paying attention to these details and imitating them, you develop a pronunciation that's both accurate and easy for others to understand. When you follow narrated speech, you're essentially learning music without notes. Every language has its own musical quality, and English is no different. Narrators know how to use that music to bring words to life. They stretch certain sounds, soften others, and place emphasis exactly where it's needed to guide the listener's attention. If you copy these patterns, your speech becomes more fluid and expressive, instead of stiff and mechanical. A common mistake learners make is to focus only on individual sounds, like trying to perfect the TH or the R, without realizing that communication is about the bigger picture. Yes, individual sounds matter, but they're just one part of the whole performance. If the rhythm and stress patterns are wrong, even perfectly pronounced sounds can feel off to a listener. Following narrated speech helps you get those patterns right because you're learning in context, not in isolation. You're not just saying a word, you're saying it as part of a sentence with the exact timing and intonation that makes it feel authentic. Another powerful benefit is muscle training. Speaking a language requires your mouth, tongue, and vocal cords to move in ways they might not be used to. When you listen to narrated speech and repeat after it, you're building the muscle memory needed to produce those movements automatically. At first, it might feel a little slow or awkward, but the more you practice, the smoother it becomes. Over time, you don't have to think about where to place your tongue or how to shape your lips. It just happens naturally. Narrated speech also exposes you to the subtle emotional tones of English. Words aren't spoken in a vacuum, they carry feelings. A narrator might deliver a line with excitement, hesitation, or warmth, and by imitating that delivery, you're not just copying sounds. You're learning how to convey emotion in your voice. This adds depth to your communication and makes your English sound alive, not flat. One practical technique is shadowing. This means listening to a narrator and speaking along with them at the same time, trying to match their pace, intonation, and pronunciation as closely as possible. At first, it can feel challenging to keep up, but it forces your brain and mouth to work together in real time, which is exactly what you need in conversation. Another method is to listen to a short section, pause, and repeat it exactly as you heard it, paying close attention to where the voice rises, where it falls, and where it pauses. Over time, you start noticing patterns you never paid attention to before. You hear how certain words are linked together in speech, how some syllables are almost swallowed, and how others are stretched for emphasis. You begin to understand that English isn't spoken word. By word like a list. It's a flowing stream of connected sounds. And once you start speaking in that same flow, you'll find that people understand you more easily and respond more naturally. Pronunciation is often the final step that transforms someone from a person who speaks English into a person who sounds comfortable in English. By training with narrated speech, you're not only improving how you sound, you're building the confidence to open your mouth and speak without hesitation, knowing that what you say will be clear, natural, and expressive. And the best part is, you don't have to wait years to hear the results. Even after a few weeks of consistent practice, you'll start noticing that your speech feels smoother, your words come out with less effort, and your voice carries a more natural English rhythm. That's the moment you realize you're not just learning how to pronounce English, you're learning how to own it. When most people hear the word grammar, they immediately think of rules, charts, and complicated explanations. They imagine sitting in a classroom, memorizing structures without really knowing how to use them. But the truth is, grammar doesn't have to be learned this way. In fact, one of the most effective ways to master grammar is to see it in action, in situations that make sense and feel real. When grammar is part of a meaningful moment, your mind doesn't just store the rule, it understands it, feels it, and remembers how it works. Think about how you learned your first language. You didn't start by reading grammar books. You heard sentences again and again in daily situations. You understood that I am comes before an action you're doing now because someone said, I am eating, while sitting at the table, and the meaning clicked. You learned how to form questions not by studying word order charts, but by hearing, are you ready? And realizing that the tone and structure meant someone was asking you something. This is exactly how grammar learning works best, through repeated exposure in context, where the meaning is obvious from the situation itself. When you learn grammar patterns in a meaningful situation, they stop feeling like abstract rules and start becoming tools you can use. For example, you might hear the past tense in a story where a character talks about their day. I woke up early, had breakfast, and walked to the park. Without consciously thinking about it, you see how verbs change to show something that already happened. You also pick up the rhythm of how events are told in sequence. Later, when you want to describe your own day, that pattern will come back naturally because you've already experienced it in context. The beauty of this approach is that it blends grammar with memory and emotion. If a scene in a story makes you laugh or surprises you, you're far more likely to remember the exact words and sentence structures used. It's not just the vocabulary you take away, it's the grammar pattern that carried the meaning. And because you learned it in a real situation, you'll know how to use it without stopping to think about the rule. This kind of learning also helps you understand the small but important details of grammar that can be hard to grasp in isolation. For instance, you might read about conditional sentences in a textbook and find them confusing. But when you hear a character say, if it rains, we'll stay inside, you instantly get the cause, in defect relationship the sentence is expressing. You're not just memorizing a formula. You're seeing how that formula works in real life. Another advantage is that learning grammar through meaningful situations allows you to absorb variations naturally. You don't just learn the basic present tense. You hear how it's used in questions, negatives, and different sentence lengths. You notice how a narrator shifts from he walks to does he walk, and he doesn't walk, depending on the meaning. All of these variations become part of your natural understanding, so you're ready to use them when you need them. It also reduces the pressure and frustration that sometimes come with grammar study. When grammar is presented as a set of strict rules to memorize, it can feel like a barrier, but when you encounter it in a story, conversation, or real life scene, it becomes part of the flow of the language. You don't feel like you're being tested. You feel like you're participating. This makes you more willing to notice patterns, try them out, and learn from your mistakes. Over time, the repeated exposure to these patterns builds a deep, intuitive understanding. You might not be able to explain every rule in technical terms, but you'll know when something sounds right or wrong. And that's exactly how native speakers operate. They rely on a feel for the language developed through years of hearing and using it in real situations. By learning grammar in context, you give yourself the same advantage. When grammar becomes something you live through rather than something you study from a distance, it stops being a source of confusion and starts becoming a source of power. It gives you the structure you need to express yourself clearly, confidently, and in ways that truly connect with others. Confidence is often the invisible wall between knowing English and actually using it. Many learners understand far more than they give themselves credit for, but when the time comes to speak or write, they freeze. They worry about making mistakes, about being judged, or about not finding the right words quickly enough. The truth is, confidence doesn't come from suddenly becoming perfect. It comes from using the language often enough that it starts to feel like a part of you. And one of the most reliable ways to build that confidence is by creating safe, supportive opportunities to practice, while slowly pushing yourself into real-world use. When you speak English, even in small ways, you train your brain to connect ideas to words without translating. At first, you might hesitate, search for the right phrase, or get stuck halfway through a sentence. But every time you try, you're building fluency. You're training yourself to think in English. The more you do this, the less you worry about correctness in the moment, and the more your focus shifts to simply getting your message across. That shift, from fear of mistakes to focus on communication, is the heart of confidence. The same applies to writing. Many learners avoid writing because they feel it exposes their weaknesses too clearly. But writing is actually one of the most forgiving ways to practice. You have the time to think, to choose your words, and to notice patterns in your own language use. Each sentence you write is an opportunity to strengthen your grammar, expand your vocabulary, and see how the ideas in your mind transform into English on the page. And just like speaking, the more you do it, the easier it becomes to start and to keep going. A big part of building confidence comes from realizing that mistakes are not signs of failure. They are proof that you're using the language. In fact, people who never make mistakes are usually the ones who never take risks. The more you speak and write, the more feedback you can get, and the more quickly you can improve. Over time, those mistakes become stepping stones to accuracy, not obstacles to progress. One reason many learners struggle with confidence is because they compare themselves to native speakers or to people who have been learning for years. This kind of comparison is unfair and unhelpful. Confidence grows best when you measure yourself against your own past performance. If you can say more today than you could last month, if you can write a short paragraph now when before you could only write a sentence, then you are moving forward. That progress is worth recognizing, and acknowledging it gives you the motivation to keep going. Exposure plays a big role as well. The more English you hear and read, the more comfortable you become with its rhythms, expressions, and patterns. Listening to stories, watching videos, reading articles, and speaking with others all contribute to a sense of familiarity that reduces anxiety. You stop seeing English as something foreign and start experiencing it as a natural tool for expressing yourself. That mental shift is where real confidence begins. Small victories matter. Ordering coffee in English without hesitation, asking a stranger for directions, writing a short social media post, or joining a group discussion. All of these moments prove to you that you can do it. Each success builds on the last until using English becomes second nature. Even if your grammar isn't perfect or your vocabulary isn't huge, the ability to communicate and be understood will give you a sense of accomplishment that fuels further improvement. Over time, you'll find that confidence doesn't just help you speak and write. It changes how you learn. When you feel confident, you're more willing to try challenging materials, to join conversations with advanced speakers, and to take on writing tasks that stretch your abilities. Confidence turns learning from a cautious process into an adventurous one. The more you practice, the more English becomes part of your daily thinking, and the less you see it as a performance you have to get right every time. That's when speaking and writing stop being intimidating tasks and start being natural expressions of who you are. Through stories, we've explored how to grow vocabulary, sharpen listening, master pronunciation, absorb grammar, and build the confidence to speak and write with ease. Each step has brought us closer to using English not just as a subject we study, but as a living part of our daily lives. So let's carry these skills forward, knowing every word, sentence, and story takes us one step closer to true fluency.